Why are JRPGs so important to so many people around the world? More specifically, what got me into JRPGs and why are they so special to me? I've had a lot of time to accumulate my thoughts and come to an understanding as to why this specific genre of game has captivated me for almost a decade. Significantly shorter than most, but for me, that's a sizable chunk of my life. But before the video continues, I wanted to clarify that when I use the term JRPG, in no way am I using it in a derogatory manner. I know that devs do not appreciate that term and I totally understand. For this video, it's just a way for me to differentiate what I'm specifically speaking on here so that you understand what this video is about. But again, I totally understand the dislike for the term and I acknowledge that JRPGs are RPGs just as much as anything else and shouldn't be put into a separate box. But anyways, I just wanted to clear that up and now onto the video. As a little sprout in the gaming world, my knowledge of video game genres were lacking. And so my gaming palette would consist of multiplayer titles and video games that were around me at the time, such as your average Call of Duty, which by the way, I was incredible at back in the day, especially when Black Ops 2 rolled around. I think I really reached my peak at that point. I would also regularly play with my friends that I had at the time, and we would play games like Happy Wars, Halo Reach, and Minecraft, which when I look back on were some really good times that you don't really appreciate until they're gone. It's also around that time where I would come to discover anime and start getting addicted to that, even over my favorite hobby, which was just playing games, which at that point I would realize that my love for video games were waning, and I was almost okay with that. I didn't have the motivation to play any games at that point because all I knew was the same shooters, low quality, repetitive experiences that I would play either online or with friends. I didn't have the game variety back then, nor did I care to even try a single player game. I thought that single player games were lame, that they didn't have any substance, and that they were a waste of time, so I didn't pay much heed to them. And boy, how wrong my 9-year-old self was, because that cycle of playing just multiplayer games would continue for another year later until I found a game that would change my perspective on gaming forever. It wasn't until I played this title that I had felt something that I have never felt in a video game before: emotion. And I'm not talking about getting a gold skin in Call of Duty type of emotion, although that's pretty great too, but the feeling that you would get when watching a film and getting attached to the narrative and characters that would fill that world. It was through this little game called Final Fantasy VII that my love for JRPGs would blossom and only continued to do so even 10 years after. Because of this genre's ability to tell compelling narratives, a sense of progression and camaraderie that I have never felt prior to discovering JRPGs. With that being said, what pushes me to prefer playing JRPGs over anything else? Even now. First and foremost, a single player focus is always key for me. And I don't know if it's just me, but that feeling of playing by yourself, even if you do prefer playing with friends most of the time, can feel relaxing in a way. To me, when I play JRPGs, having that sense of progression almost feels like the game itself is speaking to you, as if you're in the game making steady progress on the world. After all, it is an RPG. A role-playing game, and it would be disingenuous to say that that feeling wasn't what the devs wanted to invoke, at least to a degree. I felt like after getting into JRPGs, my interest in multiplayer games started to wane year after year. While each JRPG I played was only igniting a flame within me to play more, each multiplayer game would end up being the same rehash of the next, being a shell of its last iteration to try and milk fans of their money by loot boxes, skins, recycled systems and maps, and that bugged me. It only further turned me away from that type of game and encouraged me to keep playing these JRPGs that were so clearly filled with passion to try and create their best game possible, even if some entries were better than others. It also helped that with this type of game, I could choose when and how to play in my own time. Now, when it comes to these games, I've always loved the sense of direction and again, progression that makes it feel like you're getting somewhere. Whether that's just in how strong your character is, or even in the story itself, that by the end of it, you'll look back and really get a sense that this journey you went through was worth it. And that satisfaction of seeing all you built through that journey come to benefit you in the long run, it only encouraged me to broaden my horizons in the genre even more. It reminded me of when I tried playing Persona 5 for the first time without any knowledge of the previous games, to then only find out how much content was filled within Persona. And that genuinely blew my mind, because I didn't think any JRPG could get any longer than your typical Final Fantasy. And not only was it almost 3 3 times larger than that, but it also had a day system where you would have to keep track of your stats that you would level up and who you would hang out with each day. And I ate that up because I had never seen anything like that in gaming before. I mean, prior to this, the story games that I would consume barely had any depth, if at all anyways. They would most likely be low effort story experiences that you could tell were either rushed or unfinished, where at one time you were promised one thing and instead you got something completely different. Now, that's not to say that all JRPGs don't overpromise sometimes, because it's happened to every genre in the industry. And even my own favorite franchise has had its many missteps and disappointments. The point is, I'm able to forgive these games because I know that even when something didn't quite stick the landing in one area, there'll always be something that saves me from completely dropping the game out of disappointment. Take Final Fantasy XV for example. While I was disappointed in its incoherent story and lack of gameplay depth, I stayed for the amazing characters, the RPG elements, and my interest in the world building. Those things genuinely saved the game for me because it showed that not everything in the game suffered due to trouble in development, and that it kept me interested despite its setbacks. And so a big emphasis on direction and progression that plays a big part in my enjoyment of the game. But what gives soul and identity to these games just as much as characters and story? It's music. Music in a JRPG is just as much a part of its identity as anything else. I may even argue that it's quite simply one of the most important aspects to a JRPG. And I don't think I've ever heard of such a thing as one having bad music because it just doesn't exist. When you really dive deep into the music of these games, you'll come to realize how much of a story the music is telling in the forefront just as much as the narrative itself. How they serve each scene and what's going on in that particular scene itself. Take Masayoshi Soken for example, one of my favorite composers of all time, being the composer for games like Final Fantasy XIV and XVI. Soken is a master at storytelling in his music just off melody alone. He writes for that particular scene or boss in general. If the scene is about a fairy, he'll write the song to capture that essence. Like this track. If it's for a bunch of goblins trying to rule the world by using a machine that can time travel, he'll also write a song that captures that feel. Like this track here. And what about a high and loud orchestral track of fighting a dragon in space? Well, Soken has you there, and they all tell a story. For instance, this track used when fighting Bahamut in space is a tragic piece. It's a piece that speaks of a prince named Dion and his despair of being forced to murder his own countrymen, his yearning for redemption and ascension. Ascension being the name of the piece and a perfect name to describe a character like Dion, because the music itself is a full-blown tale that can really add to the experience before you. So in my head, when I think of JRPGs, I think about the best storytelling gaming can offer. And like I said earlier, these games really do give you the feeling that you're watching some of the best films that can be made, except you're interacting with it. When I go into JRPGs, I pretty much have to brace myself that I'm going to be in for one hell of a ride when it comes to the narrative and world building, especially in just how the world is given to the player to sort of have that freedom to do what you want when you want while following a big narrative experience. It really does invoke the sense that you're in the game on an adventure. Even down to the NPCs that add on to the world building, pushing you to do side quests and learn more about that person and the world around you. It's something that I feel that JRPGs shine with the most. That sort of world building that only gets better because of the characters filled within it. It's something that I've noticed time and time again with JRPGs, and how with each character that you meet, with every person that joins your group, there's always more to them. And they always have their own problems or struggles going on within themselves that makes that party dynamic so interesting in these types of games. It gives them that sort of individuality that makes them feel like real people in this ragtag group that, despite their differences, forms a party in pursuit of a common goal. And it's stuff like that that really makes me appreciate the storytelling in not only the characters, but in how JRPGs use environmental storytelling to their advantage to give the world life. And even when these games are more linear, you know that more than likely the story story and characters filled within this world will get a chokehold on you right up until the end of the game. I think in general, this genre has shown me that video games can tell some of the greatest stories ever told in media, and I truly believe that statement. The value these games hold, at least to me, are insurmountable compared to anything else I've ever experienced. And so, to me, JRPGs represent great value in money, something that I know will provide dozens of hours of content, if not hundreds. JRPGs represent a guaranteed banger of a soundtrack that are not only masterfully composed, but in many cases, go along with what's happening in the game. JRPGs are the representation of what stories and games can really be, and sometimes reflect our own lives and struggles that we've been going through as if the game was speaking right to you. They can teach us about the horrors of death, war, and loss, the value of life, love, and friendship that I think other forms of media pale in comparison. And I think the perfect blend of gameplay mixed with such profound storytelling, unforgettable characters, and music that can genuinely be seen as some of the greatest pieces of music in our time, and a form of art that can also tell the player a story. It's what has kept me coming back to this type of genre more than any other type of media out there. And it's for those multitude of reasons that no matter how much time passes, I will forever be grateful to JRPGs, to RPGs, for reviving my love for gaming.